Thank you everyone for coming. We're going to start. I'm going to hand over to James Cuthbertson to take us away.
Hello everyone, and welcome to the final Spotlight Series event of the year. Coming to you only digitally this time due to major snow and train problems in the UK. So sorry we can't be face to face with you, but we are delighted that you've joined us digitally. So the plan for today is that I'm going to be taking you through a very quick overview of Relative Insight, what it is that we do and how we do it. I'm then going to be talking to you about my 4 pieces of sage advice for driving efficiency in insights and market research functions in a saggy economy. And I'm really delighted to be joined by Richard Thornton, who's ex-Cint CRO, board member here at Relative Insight and advisor and general tech guru, who I'm going to be asking some questions to. And then we're going to be opening up to the floor for some Q&A, which will be run by Jess at the end. So without further ado, so Relative Insight. Ultimately, Relative Insight is a text analytics company. So we help our customers analyze and visualize text data. And exactly what I mean by text data, I'll come back to shortly. I think what's particularly interesting about Relative is that we had a very unusual start to life in the technology was originally designed to protect British children online. And the way that we would do that is that we would, by comparing individuals speaking online, we could identify differences in some individuals, or to put it another way, we could see when someone actually wasn't a 14-year-old girl, but was rather a 40-year-old man doing a sophisticated impression for nefarious reasons. Now, that's obviously a really cool place for a technology business to start out, but today we're talking about insights. And so there are 3 main applications for the technology nowadays. The first is to be used in digital marketing. The second is in consumer analytics more generally. And then the final piece is that customer CX use case, which is a huge growing part in all of our businesses. Now, you've heard me talk about text analytics already, and so text data is something that we're extremely familiar with, but maybe not something that you use or are familiar with in the day-to-day in your role. So just in case, I'll clear that up for you. The types of data that we tend to help our customers analyze and visualize tends to be survey data. So good old surveys, pretty ubiquitous, as I'm sure you'd agree. But what's different about the way we use survey data is that we're looking at that really rich data that exists in open ends. And so all of the amazing free-form text that sometimes can be a real pain for people to analyze. Our technology is amazing at chewing through that, organizing it, and building comparisons. The second thing is social data, typically run through social listening tools. And so we're able to ingest data from a number of different vendors and use that data to power the comparisons again in our platform. The third, which is arguably one of the most untapped sources in our opinion, is review data. So most organizations, most products will be pretty heavily reviewed online, and it's an amazing place to understand cultural trends, audiences, brands, and products. And then the final one already mentioned is that the large amounts of data that's generated and spewed out from engagements with customer service teams, whether that be chat or voice. So that's hopefully cleared up what I meant by text data. Now, on to today's topic and today's main focus, which is these 4 pointers for combating this saggy economy. And as you know, we have a way with words here at Relative Insight, so I use that word to be slightly evocative. Now, I think that it's important, before I charge headlong into these different topics, to explain why on earth I have the right to be standing up on a soapbox and talking to you about these things at all. And so the first reason is that these are not my opinions, nor are they kind of my point of view, but rather information that's been gathered across our 250 plus customers that are going through this exact challenge. And by seeing the way that some of our customers have responded incredibly well to this slightly saggy economy, and some of our customers that haven't necessarily rallied or responded all that quickly, I've been able to distill it down into these 4 topics. The second reason that I think it's relevant or interesting for me to talk about these topics is because I genuinely believe in the value exchange that exists between vendors and their customers, vendors and their prospects, and finally vendors and their industry that they operate within. And so I think that, yeah, I know that it's the traditional approach is, you know, sort of this idea that times are hard, but buy our stuff anyway. And actually, I think that that's pretty old school. And I think that the way that we can add value and the way that we can actually sort of believe in this genuine exchange of value is for us to bring Insights teams something that they can use to weather these challenging times. So the four points are: firstly, shop the closet; secondly, cute outsourcing; third, sweat your vendors; and then the final one, action, efficacy, and outcomes. A little bit wordy. Right, so let's get on to the first one, which is shop the closet. So I'll have to be honest, I actually pinched this phrase from a speaker at TMRE. It was an idea that I'd been thinking about a great deal, but actually I have to say that this wasn't my phrase, but hopefully, you know, these are the ideas that come through and are useful. So what do I mean when I say shop the closet? Well, basically what I'm trying to get to is that it sometimes, especially in abundant times, what you see is that multiple pieces of work, multiple projects, multiple research or insights approaches are either extremely close to one another and in that they have overlapping elements, or they are actually a complete redo of a big piece of work that was commissioned, maybe sometimes, in the worst cases, not even a year previously. So what do I mean? Like, more specifically, let's say, for example, we're talking about a large FMCG or a large automotive brand. We've got different parts of the organization going out and finding answers to the same questions, and therefore being highly inefficient with time, effort, and money. And so how can you address this? How can you get around it? Because I think we would all agree that that isn't a sensible idea, and to avoid it is. But there are some pointers that we've seen some of our customers, some points that we've seen some of our leading customers do or adopt in these more challenging times. So the first one is this rethink idea. So is this a piece of research that is particularly time pressing? Does it need to be done now? And does it need to be done at the scale that was initially planned for? So for example, you know, we're thinking about doing a massive kind of Europe 5 wide study on something huge, which is going to take, I don't know, 6 months, multiple methodologies, multiple suppliers, huge numbers of teams. Like, is that really required? And is that really the only way that you are going to be able to derive the insights and actionable findings that you need? So the first point that we've seen is that some of our customers have rethought timings and size and methodology. You know, some of the more traditional methodologies we know can be really incumbent and really cumbersome and take an awful lot of time. And so actually thinking about whether you can go to one of your technology partners, whether you can use your freelancer network, which we'll come back to rethink the shape and ultimately the price tag that comes along with that project. The second area of shopping the closet is reworking. So you will have had some amazing home run projects that you ran in the last couple of years. And I'm sure if you go to any Insight team, especially internally, you know, they'll be able to tell you those rock star projects that really move the needle for them. So this next bullet point is all about going back to those and finding the things that really worked, or the things that were really useful, that really drove change within your business, and specifically doing those tiny bits again, rather than commissioning a whole new project. Go back to the small pertinent part that really delivered that aha moment, that light bulb moment, and redo that small part as opposed to engaging in a whole refresh. And then the final one is reanalyze. And this is probably the one that's closest to relative insight and most relevant, in that you will have generated enormous amounts of data from all of your projects in the past, from all of the areas of your business that you're doing insights work for. And perhaps some of that data has gone unanalyzed and it's sitting on people's laptops, it's sitting in data warehouses, it's sitting in other technology vendors perhaps. And it's about getting that text data out or getting that numerical data out and using tools like Relative Insight or Tableau that you might have at your disposal to actually drive value out of that data that already exists within your ecosystem. So that's the first tip that we've seen from some of our really responsive and leading customers, Shop the Closet. The second area is I'm calling cute outsourcing. So what I'm talking about here is I'm recommending that insights teams come together, maybe in the downtime, either side of the Christmas holidays, and critically assess and look at the way that your insights program functions. What is the playbook that your insights team follow? What steps do they go through? What technology do they use? What methodologies do they lean on? And therefore, like, which areas of that step-by-step process, that playbook, if you like, could you either shrink, could you remove, or could you outsource? And in the blog that we'll be following up from this webinar, I do actually talk about Upwork and Fiverr as some amazing resources at your hand that you're able to significantly reduce the price of manual tasks that might be clogging up your insights playbook. And so how can you attack those kind of almost mundane tasks that will be costing a great deal of money and causing a great deal of time outlay, and so that you're able to put skilled people into areas within that playbook where they can really add value. And the three areas that I kind of distilled this down to was tech. So either parts of your insights playbook that could be automated or could be lent on with a tech partner that you already have in play, or using tech to streamline processes such as cleaning up data or data collection or that kind of stuff. Second thing, which is basically what I talked about, is the actual process itself. So what tasks are there that are causing problems and that are taking time? And then the final thing is team. Now, obviously, this isn't going to be the most popular thing, but are all of the teams within your insights function fully engaged in your playbook? Are they the relevant people? Are they appropriately deployed? And if not, it's an opportunity to reassess and reorganize. So on to the arguably most controversial one, coming from a vendor myself, but as I said, I believe in this genuine value exchange. Sweat the vendors that you work with. And so I've created this extremely simple matrix for you guys to understand my opinion on how you can simply classify the vendors that you work with. So the first one are these essential vendors that are absolutely the cornerstone or massively integrated into your insights process that you simply couldn't do without. And the relationship with them is that they care deeply about your success and they go the extra mile to ensure it. Now, those people, those vendors, you absolutely must keep in your mix. The second is an essential vendor that is, again, integrated and a vital part of your process, but unfortunately helpful and unresponsive. I think that those people, unfortunately, even during this saggy economical time, are to be retained because of the nature that of how essential they are. And naturally, those relationships are going to be frustrating. And I would actually encourage you to put more pressure on those vendors at the moment to up their customer success or their training or whatever it is that you're feeling unsupported by. But unfortunately, they need to be retained. Now, again, controversial. So nice to have vendors. I think that if this is not necessarily an absolute must for your insight process, but this vendor cares deeply and would go the extra mile. Again, this is an opportunity for you to really, really sweat that asset and make that vendor go really to the nth degree for you, especially if you're having pressure from headcount, if you're having pressure from being able to bring new vendors into your ecosystem. I think arguably, you know, the expectation you probably had was that I would say that this one should go. The reason that I would suggest to keep it is because it's unlikely or harder to get sign off for new vendors in this market. And if someone is going to, if a vendor is going to go the extra mile for you, then you really can capitalize on that relationship over the next 6 to 12 months, however long this economic period lasts. And then the final one, which is brutally obvious, is that if you have a vendor that you can safely agree on is nice to have, and that vendor is unhelpful and unresponsive, so you can't sweat that vendor and you can't maximize the spend with them, now is the time to absolutely cut the cord. And I think that it's a really great opportunity for you guys to create this matrix and arguably simplify some of the processes by removing the vendors that you would put into that segment. A little scary coming from a vendor ourselves, as I'm sure you'll agree. However, as we universally live in that top left-hand box, nothing for us to worry about. Anyway, jokes aside, on to the final one. So action, efficacy, and outcomes, a little bit wordy, but this arguably, I'm now talking mainly to Insight leaders. So the first three were relevant for Insight teams across the board, but this particular one is very much focused on Insight leaders. So the first point that I would encourage, or first question that I would encourage Insight leaders to answer is, who is my most senior internal customer? So if you're agency side, naturally this still applies. And if you're an internal Insights team, obviously it applies. Let me explain what I mean. The question I'm encouraging you as the head of Insights to answer is, who is the person that is my ultimate end customer for this work that I'm doing? Who is the person whose life it will change, question it will answer, and who is the most senior person that this touches? And the reason that that's so vitally important is because in order to defend budgets, in order to continue doing great work that drives great businesses, Insights teams need insights that land. And the more senior your stakeholder and your internal customer is, the more likely those insights are going to land and most importantly, go on to be actioned. So that's the first question that I would really stress you to ask and answer. And if you can't answer that question, if that's problematic, then I think that it's really key that you kind of almost go back to square one and say, you know, is this work essential? Is this work actually valuable and important? Because without that senior internal customer / stakeholder, the chances are it might be, because regardless of how amazing those insights are, they may not actually end up being actioned. The second thing is, so once we've identified this person or group of people that we're attempting to supply with these mind-bending, life-altering insights, the second thing is, why do they care about this work and what prompted it? So we're going to go away and we're going to produce these amazing insights. And when we deliver them, you know, what is it that they're going to go ahead and do with these things? Why do they care about this work? Do they still care about this work? And are we heading in the right direction? And then the third one takes me neatly on. So once we establish why they care about this work, it's when we deliver these insights, what specifically, and I think specifically is the key word here, what will they be used to inform and direct? And if that's hard to answer or isn't answered, then I would massively err on the side of caution before diving headlong into work. And I think that the other thing that we've seen from our leading customers is that the head of insights, or head of market research, head of customer experience, whoever it is that's producing these insights and runs the team, the successful customers have had this amazing leader that's been able to be a bridge between, let's say, C or C-1 stakeholders and the insights team. And they've not only elevated the work, but they've also made sure that they've been able to answer these three questions really clearly. And I think that during easier times, like bumper times, sure, perhaps insights teams can actually deliver work when they're missing 1, 2, or even 3 of these answers. But what we're seeing now is that insights teams are coming under a great deal of pressure when they can't answer all 3. So I would now like to bring in my co-host Richard Thornton, and we can take some, we're going to go through some questions before we take some questions from the floor. So Richard, can you hear me okay?
I can indeed. Yeah, thanks, James.
Superb. Okay, so firstly, absolutely delighted to have you here. You've been at this a great deal longer than me, and so I'm so keen to hear some of your views on some of the questions I've got. But the first question that I would ask is, with this shopping the closet concept that I introduced, do you think that there may be people on the call that are working in areas that are really hard to apply this? And are there some areas that are like really easy for this to be applied to?
Yeah, I definitely agree that it depends on your sort of vantage point, and I think where you sit sort of within the insights value chain. And by that, for example, if you own proprietary data and you are sitting on a lot of, valuable data and therefore potential valuable insights, I think, you're probably advantaged in being able to shop the closet and really draw on existing sort of resources and go to that well and extract sort of more value in the present climate. Because I think the theme here is really about working smarter, isn't it? And it's essentially, how can you do more with less? And typically less means, on lower budgets, arguably, more constraints, fewer resources, and really it's about getting creative. I guess 2 sort of ideas or sort of good practices I've seen. One is more straightforward and probably more easily commonly deployed, and the other is a little more radical. I'll start with the simpler one. So I've seen in sort of saggy markets and times of economic constraint, businesses that have done very well to get creative with reprising existing data sets. And actually, the use case here is turning data and insights into content, and then using that content to drive new conversations with existing clients, but also as a lead gen tool to be able to, create content and lead with that content from a new business development perspective. So I think there's a good opportunity for businesses wherever they sit in the value chain to do that in the current climate and really lean on past projects, insights and data sets that they've either delivered to clients or they still kind of own and retain themselves. The more radical idea is something we did a little at Cint during my time there, although we did it primarily internally, and that was around hackathons.
Okay.
I've actually seen some organizations sort of take hackathons one step further and open up their data sets to the public and to programmers and allow those programmers to interrogate the data and ideally, through that hackathon sort of experience and environment, unearth kind of sort of new insights and trends that can then be leveraged and repurposed and can drive sort of new projects and initiatives within the business, but also with clients. So that's another, I think, interesting potential path to sort of shopping the closet and getting more out of your assets.
Very cool. I mean, I completely didn't think about like repurposing projects for a new business. Like that's such a cool and obvious idea, I think. And I think with this whole hackathon trend, I think one of the things that is exploding in our space is naturally this chat GPT thing, where they've opened up their entire open source tech data, the whole nine, the whole model. And I know that like there's a lot of excitement, relative insight about it, but I think that it's an interesting idea, like, because your natural inclination is to kind of feel guarded about that type of stuff, like it's so precious, and actually like there's a better way to think about it.
Yeah, and there's obviously some challenges because particularly when dealing with data, you've got sort of compliance and privacy and sort of ownership and rights to consider. But as I said earlier, I think those that are sitting on proprietary data and sort of assets, this is sort of much more straightforward to do, and it's something that can be sort of unlocked almost immediately. I think the hackathon sort of approach is, as I said, more challenging, requires more sort of planning and lead time, but probably is in a way, more innovative as well in terms of some of the kind of left field sort of ideas and sort of outcomes that you might drive from doing that.
Yeah, 100%. And so like the next thing I wanted to ask about was that I've kind of advocated chopping up your vendors into that grid, of the people that work hard for you and that are kind of essential, and the people that don't and are non-essential. Naturally, if you're an in-house insights team, then you're going to have suppliers, agencies, partners, perhaps freelancers. Then you're going to have your vendor relationships that I focused on. Like, is it more complicated than I've made out? Like, how on earth do people navigate that?
Yeah, it's difficult, isn't it? I mean, you spoke about the importance of having a playbook and a defined, framework, right, for how you as a company and as an insights function or team want to operate. And I think that's really important. A lot of businesses don't go as far as creating a sort of physical playbook. But I think, if you look at sales, for example, it's quite a common tool that is utilized to try and drive, standardization and repeatability. And I think the same principles should be applied here, whether you sit in the insights organization or you're a supporting function, or a client of the insights team, understanding, I think, the kind of what I call process of truth, and what that involves or entails in terms of, the partner network, the toolkit, the tech stack you're using is really, really important, particularly in the current climate where every organization is trying to drive operational efficiencies, reduce cost, shrink time to impact and value. And I think that sort of framework and playbook, when curated, and it should be done collaboratively across the business, can inject a lot of really good practice and discipline at a time when that will pay dividends. So I think that's a good starting point. I then think clearly the current climate is driving all of us to sort of I guess think differently, and sort of sharpen the pencil in terms of how we're operating, who we're working with, and I guess trying to answer that question of can we be more effective. And I think if I look at sort of insights functions and how they'll be evaluating tools and sort of vendors, I think clearly you need some objective criteria to be able to do that efficiently. I think that's also a sort of starting point. So some sort of rules of engagement around the ability to contrast and compare, benchmark vendors, evaluate the impact and value they're bringing to you as an organization. I think that's the first thing. I think secondly, if I look at it through the vendor lens, what you should be focusing on right now, in my opinion, is really three things. One is, how easy is it to do business with us, right?
Yeah.
And as a buyer, then you project that question onto the vendor. How do I rank you in terms of ease of doing business? I think secondly, right now, how flexible are you in terms of usage and terms, right? The best partnerships are based upon those that really lean in when times get tough and show that flexibility and support. And then thirdly, and I think increasingly this one for me is becoming a differentiation just broadly across the value chain when it comes to service, and how buyers are making choice, is customer experience. So shining the light on what is your customer's experience. This could be your customer as a B2B partner, or it could be your customer as an end user or a consumer. Customer experience increasingly is cutting through and defining, where buyers and consumers are choosing to turn to in terms of where they spend, their hard pounds, but also in terms of the relationships they're prepared to invest in.
Yeah, no, I totally agree, and I don't think you can overstate the importance of like customer success, especially like if in the technology world from an adoption point of view. I think that in order to allow insights teams the chance to be more efficient and punch above their weight, they need to become true specialists in using tech or in a methodology. And without like love and care and training and attention, that isn't just going to happen overnight. So I totally agree with you. And I think all those points, like they kind of bubble up to meaning a true partnership as opposed to flogging someone something, right? And then saying, there you go, see you in a year for the renewal conversation kind of thing. Is the real difference, isn't there?
Absolutely, and not to undermine the skill in being able to sell, a proposition or a tool or a service, but the real art is in making it stick. It's in embedding it, within your customer and really making it kind of mission critical within their own environment, rather than a point solution or a nice to have. And I think those agencies, brands, tools, vendors that are positioned as being mission critical are those that obviously in the current climate are probably more insular to what's happening at a sort of macro level. So making it stick, as I call it, is really, really important, and it's that final last yard that again, is often the differentiator when it comes to retaining clients in the current climate and delighting customers as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you very much for answering those questions, Richard. Fascinating to get your point of view. We're going to bring Jess back in for the last just under 10 minutes left of the webinar. And Jess is our marketing director, everyone, for those of you that don't know. And Jess has been dutifully collecting the questions on the Q&A. And so I think we've probably got time for maybe 2 or 3 if we're quick.
I reckon we can do 5.
Wow.
I'm going to give you the top 5, so I think we can do it. So the first question, and I presume this is for both of you, but have you got any good tips for trying to turn a sour vendor relationship into a more positive one, especially when they fall into the essential bucket?
Yeah, James, I can go first.
Yeah, you go ahead.
Look, and we've all been there. I certainly have been there in the past in terms of having experience of partnerships or relationships, and I typically sat on the supply side of this equation when they've started to go sour. I think in those moments it's really important to remember what initiated the partnership in the first place, and trying to return to those principles and drivers and revisit those. Often when partnerships go sour, it's because there's an imbalance between what James has referred to as value exchange. And when that becomes tipped in one direction too heavily, clearly then there's going to be frustration, there's going to be a lack of perceived value and benefit. And I think the starting point is to revisit, the original sort of thesis going into a partnership or relationship, and evaluating, I guess, where you're currently performing against that, and then having frank, kind of clear the air discussions and the hard conversations, which make us all feel uncomfortable, but are required, at times to kind of move beyond those hurdles.
Yeah, because I would agree, right? Coming at this from a vendor lens as well, when you bought whatever it was you bought, or you engaged in whatever relationship you engaged in, that there was a reason, and there was a feel good factor, and part of that feel good factor was the people that you engaged with, right? So you must have had a positive experience. And I think I would always encourage people not to feel like embarrassed or worried about going back to those original stakeholders and saying, hey, Sam or Alice or whoever it was you knew at the beginning, this has gone off the tracks a little bit. We still need you because we bought you for the reason we need. We still have that need, but the relationship is just not there. And trust me, I think there isn't a vendor under the sun that wouldn't want to hear that, you know, that their relationship, the need was strong, but the relationship was poor, and they're going to work extremely hard in the background to make sure that they either, you know, shuffle personnel around or have a refresh, because that relationship is going to be really important to them.
Thank you. I hope that answered it. It's quite good. Number 2, so what are your views affecting the UK versus the US? Are we all in the same boat, or are there global nuances that need to be considered here?
Well, Richard, you go.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, and I'll partly answer this through the, I guess, perspective of my sort of investor hat here. I mean, look, there are clearly differences. You know, if you look at sort of the US market, you know, obviously everything is done sort of at much larger quantums in terms of, you know, size of deals, size of opportunity, you know, general volumes and activity in the market. And I think, at least from what I've seen across the portfolio of businesses I'm involved with, the US actually over the last 6 months or so has held pretty firm. This continues to be quite bullish in terms of buyer sentiment and confidence and general sort of activity, and that's reflected, I think, in general trading for businesses involved in the US, even those European companies operating over there. I think in the UK, we've obviously been bitten pretty sort of aggressively, you know, through a myriad of different macro level factors, cost of living crisis, you know, political, economical sort of uncertainty. And I think that has definitely, you know, impacted the research and res tech sector specifically here. That said, I've seen in the last sort of 30, 45 days or so, you know, a bounce back of sorts across the res tech companies I'm involved in. And it feels like there is a level of positivity now going into next calendar year and more of a sort of positive outlook about the coming 12 months. I think in the US as well, you've got, in my opinion, quite a dynamic environment where buyers are, you know, quite sort of healthy in terms of their risk profile and appetite. There's a willingness to be sort of early adopters, switching, and the ability and desire to switch there also seems to be perhaps more prevalent and more aggressive than we see arguably here in the UK. And I think clearly that creates, you know, a good environment for the insights sector and specifically vendors, you know, to sell into. So yes, there are differences. I think the US, in my mind, has probably rallied slightly better in the last 6 months than the UK has, but I'm starting to see, encouragingly, you know, a bounce back going into next year. I don't know, James, if that sort of mirrors what you're seeing as well.
100%. From a relative insight point of view, I think especially what your point you made on the UK rings true in that when the sort of economic kind of troubles started to bubble, you know, we're only talking 3-4 months ago, it felt like the UK market kind of seized up from an insights point of view, and actually it feels like very recently that's kind of relaxed somewhat. My personal experience kind of always lives through US trade shows. That's the kind of lens that I look at this through, right? So as we kind of went back to the States probably a year ago, post the main COVID pandemic, everyone was talking about COVID still in America, actually doing insights on the COVID pandemic. Whereas in the UK, we started talking about the return to work. That was the big theme. 6 to 12 months later, I'm sat in San Antonio in Texas, talking with American insight leaders about the return to work. And the British insights community has vastly moved beyond that. And so I think there's an element of lag. It's like, it's kind of weird though, right? They get all their movies first and they seem to have all the cool stuff first, and yet they seem to get the bad stuff second. we're keen to get the bad stuff first over here, it seems. That's what I've experienced anyway.
Thank you. I'm going to skip the football question about England being booted out the World Cup, and I'll move on to one for James. So of the 3 questions that leaders need to ask themselves, which do you believe to be the most critical, or are they all of most the same importance?
Yeah, my honest view is that it's the efficacy element of this. So when we produce these insights, what are they going to be used for? That's where we've seen insights teams have enormous amounts of pressure when they can't answer that question clearly, when there isn't a defined outcome, that's a desired outcome from their customers. We've seen that insights teams have come under huge amounts of pressure. So I would say like the efficacy, outcome, what are these insights going to be used for question is the key one.
Okay, I think we've got room for two more. So penultimately, is this the time simply for big giants to prosper, or should we keep an eye out for smaller, more niche and agile businesses to take advantage of this saggy current climate? I think that's to both of you.
Okay, I'll happily take that one first, I guess. So look, I think it's actually a good time for both large and small players in the insights market to kind of prosper. I don't think actually on one level there's ever been a greater need for insights teams and the broader sector in terms of the value it delivers to companies and brands and consumers. You know, if you think about the only constant being change and the disruption that the world has seen to consumer habits, buying behavior, you know, and basically norms being kind of reinvented, the need to understand that change and what the implications therefore are on one's likelihood to buy or consume a product or a service is greater than ever. And I think market research and the insight sector and ResTech specifically, you know, sort of enabling a lot of the insights collection on one level should you know be more important to boards and management teams than in the past. I think the challenge is for the sector to position itself, you know, effectively to ensure that it's able to sort of quantify and then present articulately ROI. But I actually would be quite bullish operating in the space. Now, clearly, also during an economic downturn, you know, you typically get a cleaning up of the value chain. You know, good actors will get elevated. You know, those that are providing genuine value and efficiency, you know, will come to the fore, and those that aren't won't, frankly. But I don't think medium to long term that's a bad thing. So I think there will be a shakeout clearly, and a lot of that is already underway. But overall, at a sort of kind of broader level, I actually think that there's ample room for sort of smaller niche agile players who can, you know, arguably be more cost effective, more nimble, deliver faster kind of speed to insight and value. But the larger players have their entrenched methodologies and deep rooted relationships and brand equity to lean on, and will continue to do probably very well equally. So I think the industry as a whole is well positioned.
Yeah, I would agree, and I'd lean on Richard's earlier point, which is about true partnerships. So, like, regardless of whether you're a big beast that's been around for decades, or you're a disruptor and you're small, I think that you're going to be judged on the strength of your partnerships now. And so, if you're a big beast that sticks to your guns and charges crazy prices and isn't willing to partner and isn't willing to work with your customers, then I think regardless, you know, you could end up getting punished. And that's also true of a small, you know, nimble innovator. Like if they're attempting to stick to their guns and not willing to partner and not willing to like think outside the box, again, you know, it's going to mean that it's hard, as Richard said, for people to do business with you. And so I think regardless of your size, you know, that's going to mean you'll be punished.
You touched a little bit on ROI, and obviously it's our favorite thing at Relative, but how do you see your customers, James, think about communicating their ROI upwards during times like these?
Yeah, so that's a superb question, because that leans right into this efficacy point. And my answer is another question, which is, once you've identified your senior stakeholder, your senior customer or senior customers, what is ROI for them? Is it renewing a massive advertising partner? Is it getting a new product launched on time? Is it number of clicks or impressions on an ad campaign? Is it on and on and on? And so they'll be able to measure that with hard kind of like boardroom numbers or boardroom stats. And so that's your ROI. Like that's how you get your ROI. I would discourage anyone from creating their own kind of proxy for ROI, and make sure that you're aiming at something hard that is going to stand up at like sea level, basically.
Thank you so much. That's all we've got time for. I'll hand over to James to wrap us up.
Thanks, Jess. So just to say thank you ever so much for everyone for joining. Thank you, Jess, for your questions. Richard, thank you ever so much for your insights. We will follow this up with a blog post on the Saggy economy. And the last thing to say is we hope you all have a wonderful Christmas and a restful break. See you all in the new year. Thank you very much.